It's September 30th, 2015. This is the Alex Jones Show Live. I'm your host, Paul Joseph Watson. We've got an absolutely packed show coming up today. Bottom of the hour, we've got the angry foreigner. This is a YouTube viral sensation. This is a Bosnian immigrant who lives in Sweden, which of course we bash on relentlessly. We bash on the Swedish government for their open border pro-immigration madness. But this is a guy who emigrated to Sweden, and now he's speaking out against the insanity. He's speaking out against the migrant invasion into, quote, the most progressive country in the world. So we're going to illustrate what happens when liberalism runs rampant at the bottom of the hour with the angry foreigner. You've heard us talk before about Swedish politicians actually calling for welfare and jobs for ISIS recruits who go over to fight in Syria and return to Sweden. Then they expect Swedish taxpayers to pay for their housing, to pay for their welfare, and for them to get jobs that replace Swedish employees. So this is going to be a really fascinating discussion. Again, trying to get a perspective on the migrant crisis from people who are living in Europe, who are living amongst it as these millions of migrants pour in. Second hour, we're going to talk about Gamergate. Now, this is quite a technical issue that most people don't grasp. They can't seem to understand it. But it represents a fundamental threat to free speech, to having our own independent thoughts and not being brainwashed by not just Hollywood and the news media, which is declining in influence, but video games themselves. This is the most powerful industry on the planet right now. This is the most lucrative industry on the planet. So we're going to discuss how video games are being used and seized control of by control freaks to brainwash young people. We're going to be talking to a researcher, Theodore Morgan Major, who is blowing the whistle on a plot to re-educate an entire generation via video games. And we're also going to be getting to your calls later in the show, so we'll get those lined up after the bottom of the hour. Top stories on Infowars.com, which we'll be covering in the next segment. CNN analyst says Trump Carson to blame if gunman shoots Muslims in a mosque. This is a CNN analyst who got up on Don Lemon's show and basically said, because of the, quote, anti-Muslim rhetoric being spewed by Donald Trump and Ben Carson, that's going to cause crazies, right-wing radicals to go out and shoot Muslims in mosques. We're going to break down that propaganda. We're going to point out the fact that the left never blames hate preachers who influence jihadists to go and shoot up cartoon events like we saw in Paris, like we saw in Garland, Texas. They blame the cartoonists themselves. But it's okay to blame Donald Trump and Ben Carson for an event that hasn't even happened yet. So we're going to break down that propaganda. Also, Muslim man admits strangling his daughter for dishonor after she was caught stealing condoms. And this happened in Germany, again, where this migrant invasion of predominantly Muslim men is taking place. Shocking story. And this is the very kind of culture that we're importing into Europe. We're also going to talk about how Obama gave 1,500 terrorists asylum in the US. This is a Judicial Watch expose, which we covered on Infowars.com yesterday, where basically 50% of those rewarded residency were linked not only to this refugee crisis, but also to providing material support to terrorists. And these are the kind of people who Obama plans to import. We're talking about 100,000 people imported into the US within the next couple of years. We'll be right back. This is the Alex Jones Show Live. I'm Paul Joseph Watson. Infowars.com. Stay tuned. We're back live. It's the Alex Jones Show. I'm your host, Paul Joseph Watson. We've got a great guest coming up at the bottom of the hour. He's called the Angry Foreigner. He's a viral success on YouTube. And basically, he's blowing the whistle on how this mass immigration, this open border policy, is impacting Sweden as they prepare to let in, who knows, 100,000, 200,000, 1 million migrants back into Sweden, even though they've got the highest Muslim migrant population in comparison to the host population in Europe. It's going to be a very interesting discussion. We've bashed on Sweden so many times in the past, of course, making the distinction between the government and the people of Sweden. But this is going to be an illustration into what happens to a country when liberalism, as they call it, as they define it, or when progressivism runs rampant. So that's coming up at the bottom of the hour. But the top story, my story on Infowars.com today, is this. CNN analyst says Trump, Carson to blame if German shoots Muslims in a mosque. So basically this leftist got up on CNN and said, if a nutcase goes on a rampage in a Muslim mosque, then Ben Carson and Donald Trump, the Republican presidential candidates, will be to blame simply because they criticized radical Islam. And you probably saw the clip on Infowars a couple of days ago. It was Ben Carson in an interview with Jake Tapper of ABC News. And basically all he said was that Muslims who embrace the Quran, he can't support them as president because that's incompatible with the US Constitution. So we're going to break down this propaganda, but let's go to this clip from CNN. Here it is.
Would we ever accept a presidential candidate that would apply the same rules, would say the same things about Jews and black? We would never tolerate them, would never respect them, would never expect, even accept them. We will shun them aside. But we accept it against Muslims because sadly, in the Republican base, this is what is appealing to them today. And not only
Mercedes?
that, what happened, and I think let me just finish this, please, because it's very important. What happened with Trump? We are discussing the first part of what was said and Trump endorsed, which is we have a problem called Muslims, but there's a second part, how to get rid of them. And in the realm of possibility, in a country that is very armed, that somebody that will be carrying weapon will go to a mosque tomorrow or after tomorrow and will start shooting people. And then these people will have blood on their hands, all of them.
Carson, 2 points here.
And
I've got to go, guys.
That's the clip from CNN. And basically, as you heard, she was making the argument, completely ridiculous, that because Trump said that radical Islam is a problem, and that's basically all he said. You know, he got up and did a speech and said that, you know, Muslims are a problem in America. He did an interview with CNN after the fact and said, yes, radical Islam is a problem. Like that would be a controversial statement. Like that would be shocking in any context. Of course, radical Islam is a problem. And then Ben Carson, all he basically said was that if you take the tenets of the Quran and Sharia law into the office of the president, then that is incompatible with the US Constitution. That's incompatible with basic freedom, basic rights as we understand them to exist in America. And again, why is that even controversial in the first place? So this woman, this supposed geopolitical analyst, gets up on Don Lemon's show and says, this is going to cause some right-wing nutcase, some lunatic, to go postal in a mosque and start shooting up Muslims, which is funny because, you know, when jihadists who shoot up places in Garland, or at least attempt to, they weren't successful because America has the Second Amendment. They were successful in Paris at the Charlie Hebdo shootings because, of course, we've been completely disarmed in Europe. We can't protect ourselves. There's no condemnation whatsoever. As happened in Paris and Garland, who do liberals blame? Do they blame Islam? Do they blame Islamic hate preachers for spreading the kind of hate that justifies such acts? No, they blame the cartoonists for, quote, provoking the jihadists. And in fact, a day after Charlie Hebdo shootings in Paris, Chris Matthews came out on MSNBC and said that the cartoonists themselves were to blame for provoking the attack. And even the Pope rhetorically sided with the Charlie Hebdo jihadists, with the Islamist terrorists, because he asserted that, you know, insulting someone's religion shouldn't be a part of free speech. So the entirety of the leftist media after the Charlie Hebdo attacks, after the attacks in Garland, Texas, where they tried to shoot up a Draw Muhammad cartoon exhibition, were completely aligned behind the notion that the people to blame for this were the people drawing the cartoons. And yet this woman is saying, no, it's the rhetoric from Donald Trump and Ben Carson that will be to blame when some, right-wing Christian lunatic shoots up a mosque. So it's a fundamental hypocrisy, which we see again and again with the leftist media. Did liberals blame Obama and the Democratic base when Bryce Williams executed a TV reporter live on air, Alison Parker, and her cameraman? His manifesto said that he did that to try and start a, quote, race war. The same race war that has been promulgated by the Black Lives Matter movement, which has been supported, at least tacitly, by the Obama administration. Was the blame laid at the door of the Obama administration for that violent act? No. Was the blame for the NYPD killings back in December? Ishmael Brinsley shot 2 NYPD officers in the head, in his own words, as a, quote, revenge attack for Black Lives Matter. We've had Black Lives Matter activists plan to bomb police headquarters in Ferguson, again, to get revenge for their supposed political motivation. Was that blamed on the Obama administration? Was that blamed on the Democratic base by the leftist media? No. Then we had Floyd Lee Corkins. This is the guy who was so upset over the Family Research Council opposing gay marriage, again, at the same time as the Obama administration tried to, get this Supreme Court ruling passed on gay marriage. They were activists for that. He went into the Family Research Council, basically tried to kill as many people as possible, and his motivation was the conservative beliefs of this organization. Was that act blamed on Obama? Was that act blamed on the Democrats? No. So again, whenever someone like Dylan Roof in Charleston goes on a rampage, they lay the blame at the door of conservatives. But when a Muslim jihadist goes on a killing spree, the blame is laid at the door of those who dared to offend the terrorist killers. We saw it in Paris. We saw it in Garland. We saw it in Copenhagen. And again, no blame is apportioned to the fact that passages in the Quran legitimize, encourage, and justify the bloodshed that has been carried out in the name of Islam, which again is not to say that you don't make the distinction between moderate Muslims who don't support this and the extremists who do. But don't go and blame Donald Trump and Ben Carson for a rampage, a massacre that hasn't even happened simply because they were critical of radical Islam. It's completely ridiculous. But I guess the solution is, just not to talk about politics or religion whatsoever in public. And if we can get that Mark Dice clip queued up, Mark Dice actually went out on the streets of San Diego and, he continues to top himself in the ludicrousness of what these leftists will support. And they actually supported banning the discussion of politics and religion in public. So this, we don't even have to debate about this anymore, because as long as we shut down free speech, no one's going to be able to have an opinion. And this is all being pushed, again, by the authoritarian left. Let's go to that clip.
We need a few more signatures for a new initiative just to prevent, political and religious speech at the beach. So just a couple more signatures. Just print your name there. We don't really need people talking about politics or religion out in public, right? There's a time and a place for those kind of discussions, and we're just trying to, mute people's political and religious speech just when they're in public, though. Right. In private, you could carry on those conversations. Awesome. Thank you so much for supporting that.
Have a good day.
Every time people come to the beach, they don't want to be, hearing people talk about politics or religion, and this is a place for fun and sun, and a birthday to are basically,